Bet horse racing on DRF Bets. We'll match your first deposit of $200. Get free expert picks and past performances, plus weekly cash back. All from Daily Racing Form, the most trusted name in horse racing. Dan Illman, Mike Buer, taking a look back at the Robert B. Lewis Stakes in this edition of Kentucky Derby Prep Recap. Now, usually the Robert B. Lewis is an important stepping stone on the road to the Kentucky Derby, but this year in 2023, well, no Kentucky Derby qualifying points were on the line because Bob Baffert trained all four of the entrants in this race. We break from the gate, and Newgate, who was the favorite in here, is breaking from post position 2. And Baffert had mentioned in the press that he really wanted to get this horse to try to relax and finish up better, and I guess it worked out.
Yeah, it seemed like it worked out in his prior start, Dan, in the Sham. It was the first time they really took him back, and it seemed like he improved that day. I guess you could say he improved again here. Frankie Dettori just took a hold of him from the gate. You can't take him too far back and get him too relaxed, Dan, because it's only a 4-horse field and they're not going to go fast in front of him. But he just sits right up close the entire way. He'll challenge forward around the second turn, and he'll eventually get the job done.
Sort of bunched up like a training session, 2 by 2 down the backstretch. Arabian Lion, who won his debut sprinting and was absolutely atrocious in his most recent start as the big favorite in the Los Alamitos Futurity. He's getting pressure from the longest shot on the board, Hard to Figure. If you're a fan of Arabian Lion, you can't be upset with this trip at all, and he failed to fire again.
I guess you could just say he doesn't want to go far, at least at this point. And his first 2 career starts sprinting were fine. His last 2, since they stretched him out, have been absolute disasters. He's on the lead here. He gets a perfectly comfortable trip. He's no match when they come for him. We've been seeing this, at least so far, Dan. It's something that I think is worth keeping an eye on. He's by Justify. Justify's been a pretty good sire. They've been really good sprinters, and they've not been nearly as good going long.
The hardest to figure of the Baffert 4, the longest shot on the board, Hard to Figure, is going to get first run, but he's immediately pounced upon by Newgate on the far outside. And I think a lot of folks expected Newgate, who came into this race with maybe a little bit more credential than Hard to Figure, although Hard to Figure was the lone stakes winner coming in, would go right by. Give Hard to Figure some credit. He battles all the way down to the wire, and this race came back very fast.
Yeah, that's I think maybe the most compelling thing about the race, because as you've already, sort of referenced it, they sort of ran it like a training session with the 4 Baffert horses not going that fast and no real moves throughout the running. But it did come back with a 100 buyer for Newgate and Hard to Figure. So I guess that's a good thing. Hard to Figure certainly outran his odds here, Dan, but he was only second best.
Talking about some of the also-rans, Worcester came into this race as, I believe, a 3rd start maiden, and he was running on at the end of this race, Mike, and he earned a buyer's speed figure in this race that would make him a contender if he moves on to another Kentucky Derby prep down the road. Of course, they also run these things called maiden special weights, and he'd be 1 to 10 if he shows up there.
You feel like that's probably got to be the next move. I don't know. We'll see what they decide to do with him, Dan. He actually ran okay in here. It's very interesting that in his first 3 starts so far now, in his career debut, it seemed they were just intent on getting him off the pace and letting him make a run through the stretch. That seemed to work out fine. But in his 2 starts since then, including this one, when you go back and watch the start, this horse breaks very alertly from the gate. And they just have no interest in going forward with this horse. And I'm not trying to make a big excuse for him here, Dan, but it felt like if they wanted to be part of this pace, they could have been. And maybe that would have made some kind of a difference, because he did stay on pretty well at the end of this race.
He does act like more distance will be his friend. As for Arabian Lion, I think there are 2 things that handicappers have to look at when confronted with Arabian Lion when he shows up for his next start, most likely in a turn back and distance situation. A, was it simply the distance of his last 2 starts that beat him? Or B, is he just not that good? And I'm kind of siding with B right now.
I might be too. We'll see what they do. It seems almost certain that Baffert will have to cut him back in distance for his next start, and maybe try to find an allowance race for him if they still write those out in Southern California, because stretching him out in stakes races in his last 2, it's just been an abject disaster. He's run terrible in his last 2 starts.
Hard to Figure's performance, even though he came into this race as the lone stakes winner in the field, that was against Calbreds and the Capote. Where did this race come from?
I don't know. I mean, I guess to me, more than any other horse in this race, he's the one I guess you want to see come back in his next start and try to confirm the big figure this race got there, because he was way too slow on the way in here. And you'd have to just sort of suspect that the way this race was run, not at a demanding pace where he's just sitting up outside of a horse who apparently can't run at all in Arabian Lion. I mean, that's what often leads to big improvement for horses, especially lightly raced and young horses, like Hard to Figure. So maybe that was just the case. I'm not buying into him yet, but he certainly, ran pretty well in this race.
Let's take a closer look at Newgate. It was a big weekend for Super Stallion Into Mischief. He sired the winner of the Holy Bull Stakes. He sired the winner of the Robert B. Lewis in Newgate, who earned a 100 buyer speed figure for this race. Newgate sold for $850,000 as a yearling. The dam was grade 3 placed at a mile. I think there were some questions about his distance abilities going down the road. I still think there are a few, although he seems to be trending the right way. Now, I would assume that the top 3 finishers of this race, Mike, as with all of the Baffert-trained horses, they'll be dispersed to many different trainers in the hope of getting Kentucky Derby points.
Yeah, they have no choice if they want to run in the Derby. Newgate certainly, has earned his shot to take the next step, Dan. If nothing else, the change in riding tactics in the last 2 starts, where they just sort of take a hold of him early and try to get him to make one run through the stretch, it's really worked for him.
Newgate was walloped by his current stablemate, Cave Rock, in the Del Mar Futurity going 7/8. He was well beaten by Forte, the 2-year-old champion in the Breeders' Futurity, but those races were with blinkers when the objective, it seemed, was to get forward, and he might have gotten cooked. This is a new Newgate. Was the ultimate winner of the Robert B. Lewis Reincarnate, the horse that outgamed Newgate 2 starts back in the Sham? Is that horse better than it appeared at the time?
I guess you could look at it that way. Listen, again, I'd be remiss to just put too much stock into this performance. I realize that it came back fast. It's a hard race for me to get behind. I don't really want to make any judgments, not only about these 4, but about the horses that they were competing against prior, just because of this performance.
Let's take a look at the prices for the Robert B. Lewis. The Baffert favored Newgate wins, returns $4. Hard to Figure is the longest shot, runs second in the trifecta, 243. Returned $18.60 for 50 cents. Newgate perhaps on to the Santa Anita Derby. If he does, he'll likely be with another trainer.